So here's the thing about using addiction as an excuse in Bojack Horseman. There's a very difficult balance that should be struck when dealing with people who are struggling with addiction. It's important to recognize the gravity of what they are grappling with, and to recognize that some of their behavior is symptoms of an actual illness. However, it's equally crucial for you to take care of your own feelings and health as well, and to not allow yourself to be dragged down along with the person if they continually refuse attempts to help and then turn around and hurt you, emotionally or even sometimes physically. Because some addicts, like Bojack, may recognize their addiction and defer responsibility toward it, rather than actually making steps to change and accept culpability for their actions, even using that addiction to keep acquaintances around them, all while they repeat the same mistakes over and over again. Bojack's journey with a couple of his friends conveys this idea exceptionally well. Todd spends approximately 7 years living in Bojack's house, dealing with his negative behavior every single day. He is constantly berated, shot down, ignored, pretty much everything that you shouldn't do to a friend. And through all that, he endures it. Mostly because he doesn't really have anywhere else to go, and though, against all odds, he does consider Bojack to be his friend. But sometimes even, Bojack directly interferes with Todd's plans to keep him in the house, as Bojack himself can't bear to be left completely alone with his thoughts. But also, as I said, won't make the steps to change for a majority of the series and actually be a better friend to Todd, so he won't want to leave or distance himself. But to be able to keep this relationship together, Todd kind of has to put aside what he wants and to make certain intense concessions of his own happiness. In Downer Ending, after finding out about Bojack's sabotage of his rock opera, he resolves to simply accept that that is how Bojack will act, that he is an alcoholic who does not care about hurting those around him, and if he can predict that, then maybe it won't hurt him as much when Bojack inevitably wrongs him again. He won't be blindsided, and he'll be ready for it, from his point of view. See, instead of resolving to change or admitting that he has a problem, Bojack simply deflects his dissatisfaction onto Todd, leaving the responsibility on him to change, to evolve to be able to weather Bojack's bad days or bad moods, if he wants to remain in this friendship, and as close as he is to Bojack, though still, of course, at a bit of a distance. Or, after Todd eventually begins to inevitably grow discontented with Bojack's behavior and lack of care, Bojack embarks on a grand gesture, like in Out to Sea when he saves Todd from the Shenanigans cruise, the Giggle Ship. Wow, that sounds so ridiculous when you say it all out loud. Bojack declares, though, how much he cares for Todd by correcting him on a memory from the morning he first moved in, stating that Todd helps him to feel good about himself by reminding him of the best thing he ever did on purpose. But to be honest, this is less meaningful than it first seems. It is sweet, to be sure, and definitely a kind gesture, but when we later see the moment Bojack allows Todd to stay, it doesn't really seem like it's out of kindness. It's more out of apathy for the situation and exhaustion from learning about his father's death. Not only that, but Bojack is pretty directly saying that he wants Todd around, only because it helps him feel better about himself. Because Todd reminds him that he can be good, even if he's not actively trying. See, he never really treats Todd that way. In the premiere of Season 3, we see Bojack making a bit of an effort to be more patient with him, but it doesn't last very long, as just a few episodes later, he sleeps with Emily, Todd's sort of love interest. I've seen a lot of people say that it isn't really a betrayal because Todd and Emily weren't technically dating, which I do understand, but Bojack also clearly knew that they were interested in one another and had history, and it's not difficult to see that Todd is still figuring out his own desires, if you know, really look at him, and how to approach adult relationships at this time. Bojack absolutely knew that it would hurt Todd that they slept together. It's why he chose to keep it a secret in the first place. Plus, Bojack sleeps with Emily almost entirely on a whim, stating to the closer that I was lonely and she was there. For him to knowingly hurt Todd for such a simple, flimsy reason after promising to be better on that boat only proves to Todd that he doesn't really care about him. Which leads to the infamous scene in It's You where Todd really calls it quits, when Bojack once again tries to blame his behavior on the fact that he was drunk. I think Todd really reaches a point where not only logically, but emotionally even, he can't justify this relationship anymore, even if he genuinely might want, with all his heart, for Bojack to change and be a better friend to him, to improve for his own sake as well. After so many disappointments and shocks, even after that resolution that he believed believed would make things easier, he realizes that it hardly diminishes the pain he feels when Bojack crosses him again and again, always disregarding his feelings in the face of his own addictions. And so he tells Bojack exactly what he kind of has needed to hear this entire time. That actually, he is the one who has done all of these horrible things. He has made these mistakes, not drugs, not alcohol, and not the constant need for sex. It was all him. He is culpable. Now, there's a lot of debate in my comment sections, and there's even different scientific approaches to addiction, the voluntary choice model versus the brain disease model, but ultimately there is empirical evidence that demonstrates some level of control in those who do suffer addictions. Yes, they are often transmitted genetically so that some are predisposed, and yes, they do take charge of the pleasure centers of the brain to drive the victim toward those decisions that support the addiction, but there is also an abundant number of people who are able to overcome, those who definitely meet the criteria defined in the DSM for the official definition of addiction, but eventually, even on their own, work through their habits and reach healthy levels of consumption. I also don't want people taking this the wrong way, i.e. all the way in the opposite direction to where it's perceived I'm saying that addiction is entirely a voluntary choice that these people make on their own, it's easy to rid yourself of, and that they simply don't want to, and this influence is not based on any sort of illness. That is not the case at all. Like I said in the beginning of this video, there is a balance between these two ideas, I believe. There is a severe amount of evidence supporting the brain disease model, showing how it can take advantage of our decision-making processes and almost trap you in those cycles. But there's also something to be said about those who experienced addiction and were able to eventually make the choice to begin to better themselves. It is different for every person, and there are degrees of severity, as there are for most illnesses. But despite that, it doesn't entirely excuse the actions that an addict may take under the influence or to secure what they need. I read a really fantastic article to write this video entitled "Addiction as an Excuse" that really dove deep into the responsibility aspect of addiction and how it can be used as an excuse for its consequential actions, and whether it should be used as an excuse or even is excusable. Essentially, it comes to the following conclusion. Addicts are ultimately responsible for what they do, and they deserve a certain degree of blame for the negative or toxic actions that they take due to their addiction. Even with diminished control, there is still some control there, and a choice to follow the addiction is being made. So whatever happens while they are under the influence is ultimately their responsibility, as long as they know the risks. However, and this is the important part, this does not mean that addiction is not excusing in some way. They are responsible, but the degree of blame that can be placed directly on the person versus their addiction itself can differ based on the particulars of the person's experience. Like we've established, for many, addiction can be completely overwhelming, even transmitted through a genetic link, to the point where decisions are severely impaired. So while it's important to recognize how addicts are responsible for what they eventually do, it's equally crucial to understand their thinking before the act. Did they consider other people's feelings or safety and try to avoid hurting them before being backed into a corner by the addiction itself? Are they making an effort to fight their addiction before succumbing to it? What is their history with addiction? How often has this type of thing happened in the past? All of these questions are something really important to consider when assigning degrees of blame, and compassion must be included for those who are suffering from this recognized disease. Diane as well has a really difficult time finding this balance for herself throughout the series, often having to directly deal with many of Bojack's meltdowns and depressive episodes. But on some level, Diane really understands what Bojack is going through, having had depression herself, more so than many others in the main cast, and is thus more persistent and present in trying to get him to accept help and truly change, because honestly, it's a reflection of herself. But again, this video's not really about that. At the end of season 3, when Bojack is at his lowest, Diane is the one who encourages him to pick himself back up, that his life has value to millions of people. Even after he runs away to Michigan and doesn't talk to her for months, she insists that she can't wait for him to be better. She really is hoping for him to be able to admit his flaws and change. She sees that drive in him, that part of Bojack that really wants to be different, because it is there. That's why so many people are sympathetic to Bojack. It's painfully obvious how much he wants to change. It does exist. Todd could see it too, but he was just hurt too many times to stay close enough to perceive it. But in season 5, we really hit a turning point when Diane discovers that Bojack has not been honest with her about the extent of his transgressions. Her confidence in Bojack actually wanting to be better kind of wavers here, because if he can't admit the truth to her or himself, then he doesn't really have a desire to change. You can't move toward the future without accepting the past. It's just not possible. So Diane resolves to end their relationship, not because she doesn't think he can be better. In fact, she directly states the opposite in the episode Head in the Clouds, but because she believes she's had a negative effect on him and has given him the wrong idea by throwing him so many bones. Metaphorically, of course, the real bones are thrown to Mr. Peanut Butter. And even after he tells her about Penny and what happened in New Mexico because of her kind of ultimatum, not really so explicit, but Diane hears how he excuses it. How after every other sentence describing the incident, he tries to pawn it off on the fact that he was drunk, or that it wasn't that bad because it's technically legal in that state, or the fact that Penny instigated. When she hears all of that, she knows that he really has no intention to change at this moment and exits. I mean, he also directly stated to her in this scene that he has basically given up. And afterwards, because of this, I think, partly, Bojack hits perhaps the rockiest bottom in the entire series, ruining yet another relationship of his permanently. But the best part about the 5th season is that after all of this turmoil, Bojack is still able to make the decision to actually change and take concrete steps, and Diane is still able to support him. She is able to discern when he is earnestly trying to change, and even though he has put her through a lot emotionally, she's still willing to be there to support him, to push him to take that step in the right direction. She doesn't forgive him. She pretty much explicitly states that she doesn't forgive him. She believes him to be responsible for everything that he did, but she can also still understand part of his struggle, direct some degree of blame toward his addiction, and find a way to still support him to recovery, which I think is a beautiful lesson. Unfortunately, in a very realistic turn, Bojack does not stay sober permanently and slides back into his addiction, eventually resulting in the infamous voicemail to Diane that he leaves before almost drowning in his former pool. This is where Diane, similarly to Todd, reaches her kind of emotional limit with Bojack. She cares about him. That is evident. She wants him to be better. That is super evident. But she just can't risk another backslide, and she can't be sure Bojack won't cause her to spiral and ruin everything good that she has going for her ever again. But she leaves him with the kindest words she possibly can. She thanks him for everything good he's done for her, everything he's taught her, and assures him that everything is going to be okay, that he is doing well again and he can do well in the future. But ultimately, she's likely not ever going to see him again because she knows just how badly Bojack can and will hurt her if he takes steps backwards. And she can't forgive him for all that he's done to her, and ultimately, again, has to call it quits at the end of the day, for her own safety. To sum up what I've been covering in this part, I know that it's really difficult to walk the line between forgiving, or at least not fully blaming, and leaving toxic relationships behind. At the end of the day, it really is up to the individual situation and person, both the addict and the person who is deciding these things, whether that be the severity of their addiction and the lack of control they have, the amount of care they still hold for you, the amount of mistakes they've made in the past. Those factors are critical in considering how much blame to actually levy onto the person themselves and how much can be excused by their addiction. I hope this section was helpful. I found that article I spoke of extremely informative, and I'll link it in the description in case any of you want to see where I got this information, this point of view, and if you disagree, please let me know in the comments below. Correct me if you have perhaps more personal experience with me than with addiction. I would love to hear from you guys, and I don't mean to offend or criticize in any way. Just trying to walk that line. Another way this theme presents itself in this series is through Dr. Champ in the 6th season, I believe. Dr. Champ works for the rehab center that Bojack attends as a therapy horse and is a reformed alcoholic himself, having apparently done irreparable damage to his relationship with his husband and possibly his daughter. They only really allude that something happened to his daughter. I always took it as she had possibly passed away, and that's why his relationship with his husband is so strenuous. But his addiction is clearly very severe, and the second he gets his hands on some alcohol, even by accident, he has the potential to fully relapse. And perhaps his husband understood how severe his addiction was, and perhaps his past with addiction. And that's why, with rehabilitation, of course, they were eventually able to work things out, even after this horrible trauma that they both endured. We see the extent of this, though, when Bojack's vodka-filled water bottle accidentally makes its way into Dr. Champ's hands. Even though, obviously, you'd be able to taste the difference in, like, a single sip, or even really the second you took the cap off of that bottle. He completely downs it in a few gulps, not even coming up for air. We really see here how much of a hold his addiction has over him, and then this sends him down a very familiar looking path, which Bojack desperately tries to steer him away from because he feels responsible for the water bottle, even placing him in a different rehabilitation facility to be able to hopefully point him in a better direction. But we see later on that this didn't really stick, and Dr. Champ, rather than recognizing his own role in his addiction and admitting his powerlessness over alcohol, blames Bojack for ruining him, which only leads him further down this treacherous path, quite honestly. He refuses to admit to himself that he has relapsed, that he has made the decision time and time again, after receiving direct help from Bojack, to avoid admitting his own mistakes to himself and to his family, which only leads him to feeling more guilty, leading him to seek comfort from alcohol once again. He even works to destroy Bojack's career and reputation by revealing secrets that Bojack believed he was confessing to him in private to the media, further moving away from accepting responsibility and only deferring it onto Bojack. Like I said before, while yes, Dr. Champ does seem to have a rather severe case of addiction, and much blame should be put onto that, his illness, his refusal to take any responsibility at all, and insistence that Bojack is awful and ruined him completely and permanently, is a hindrance to his actual recovery, and is also quite untrue. Before I get to my last main point, I'd really like to quickly discuss Sarah Lynn with regard to this lack of taking responsibility. Although Sarah Lynn was 100% molded by her upbringing, her mother forcing her to perform, her experience in Hollywood, all of the negative effects and pressures that caused her to take drugs and rely on alcohol in the first place, all of that is important to recognize. But it's also important to recognize that Sarah Lynn doesn't exactly take any ownership in her decisions to use these drugs or to relapse. Again, it's not entirely her fault, but there is still a choice being made at the end of the day there. And even when Sarah Lynn does decide to go sober, she doesn't fully commit to it, as I believe she never actually admitted her own responsibility, her own role in her addiction, and always pawned it off entirely on her parents or on Hollywood, and not taking any ownership over her actions, which is something that is a crucial step in the recovery process to be able to move forward with a sober life. But she never does that, and thus never really takes sobriety seriously, keeping drugs and alcohol all over her house to use at any time, and basically invites Bojack to break her sobriety whenever he feels like it. I know, again, Bojack is partially responsible for her actually deciding to do this. He is the catalyst, but it is her decision. We can't take away all of Sarah Lynn's agency. That's not fair to her either. She was an adult, and she did ultimately decide to engage with dangerous substances that lead to erratic behavior that hurt random bystanders and people that cared about her. And I think her blaming her addiction entirely on everyone else is part of why she never fully recovered. But where this idea really came to the forefront, or really when I came up with this video idea, is with the character of Vance Waggoner. Vance is, simply put, a shining symbol of what Bojack could be if he continued walking down this path of blame and deflection, never learning from his mistakes, putting the onus on others to accept him as he is, instead of actually resolving to change, and constantly repeating the same cycle of abuse, apologizing, promising to change, and falling into the pattern all over again, because none of it is his fault, it's all his illness. One of the largest parts of recovery is taking responsibility for past actions and admitting what you yourself have done wrong, as I have been saying pretty much this entire video. Vance suggests that because he is a different person now, he doesn't owe anything to those people who still hold him accountable for his past actions, and still can't bring themselves to forgive his immense amount of extremely alarming transgressions that he still continually commits to this day, even when he appears to be sober. Which we also get no indication that he actually attempts to be, evidenced by the fact that when Bojack calls him in the horny unicorn, he picks up drinking at a bar. Sir, I thought you were in recovery. I mean, in this very episode, we get every indication that he takes advantage of this young, drunk college girl and sleeps with her. He has no intention of changing his behavior and is incapable of recognizing the destruction that he causes. He believes that because he is an addict who has reformed himself and apologized over and over again, he deserves to be able to move on without ever thinking about those mistakes again or anyone bringing them up. He goes where the love is, or in real terms, he goes to whoever inflates his ego or excuses his behavior, whoever supports the idea that he has no control and is therefore blameless for all the awful things that he has ever done while under the influence, and if he eventually succumbs to his illness again. But in reality, you can't just forget and abandon everything that you've done and expect to turn your life around immediately, and you shouldn't hold resentment toward those who still remember what you've done to them and might be uncomfortable around you. It has permanently affected your relationship with them. There is no running away from that. There are consequences to your actions. It's part of recognizing your part in all of that negativity. If you truly understood what you've done wrong and the gravity of that, then you wouldn't blame those people for feeling that way. You'd get it. If you don't accept the consequences, you can't ever hope to truly recover. Not to mention that if none of that means anything and has no consequences, then what the hell is the point of acting like a good person? I mean, I know that's not the only driving force, but seriously, like, if there are no consequences to your actions, that'd be absolute chaos. People have to keep track. Vance villainizes his past relationships, though, even his one with his own daughter, believing that they enjoyed watching him recurrently fall off the deep end or embarrass himself, when that could not be further from the actual truth. Likely, all his poor daughter wanted was a supportive, loving, and present father, but he can never admit that to himself, because it would require him to also accept how much trauma he himself has instilled into her, and has chosen to do so, making her, his exes, his old friends vindictive and evil. It's an easy way to avoid seeing who he truly is on the inside, because once he looks in the mirror, this inflated ego that he holds so closely will crumble right in front of him, and he will realize how truly pathetic of a man he has chosen to become. Overall, addiction and recovery is a complicated process, and I completely understand why so many feel conflicted about perhaps walking away from people that they care about who are actively hurting them, or why many feel you shouldn't ever defer any blame and should hold them entirely accountable and be very strict to get them to clean up their act. I'm not saying you're unreasonable to feel either of those ways. Nobody wants to be too harsh, and nobody wants to be manipulated. Addiction is a disease that removes some levels of control, but it can also be used as an excuse to continually hurt those around them while simultaneously retaining their closest relationships. Both things can be true at the same time. And like I said, of course, it is different for every person. But at the end of the day, if the addict is not able to admit to themselves their own responsibility in what they've done and part in those mistakes that have caused others pain, true rehabilitation and recovery is simply not possible. But I thank you so much for watching this video. If you want to support this channel further, you can go to patreon.com/PosiTVty. That's PosiTVty. There you get all of these videos before they come out on YouTube. You get to hear everything I put in the video without editing, unedited essays, so they're very messy and filled with offhand commentary, and you get to choose exactly what you want to see on the channel, and I'll do it pretty much as soon as I can. Even if it's a show that I don't know, I will watch it for you. But all the support on YouTube really means a ton to me. Like, seriously, I know I say this every video, but I can't convey how much the support fills my heart and, you know, makes me optimistic for the future. Seriously. It's beautiful to see, and I thank you all for creating this positive space on the internet. I feel like it's really important. And I will see you for the next video, whatever you want that to be. But I hope you have a wonderful day.